Good afternoon. I think most of the participants are in attendance, and we're actually a couple of minutes after our scheduled start. Let's kick off the proceedings for the USA Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub, or the USA Trade Hub Regional Cross-Border Trade Toolkit Namibia webinar. Warm good afternoon to everyone. It's really great to have you all with us. And more especially to delve into this very important topic this afternoon, which we hope will really add value to your businesses. From my side, just briefly, if you will allow me to introduce myself, I'm Pieter Moller, the country representative in Namibia for the USA Trade Hub. I'll also be your moderator this afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to spend some time with you. I have mostly corporate financial services experience in listed investments and insurance in Southern Africa. And together with Tanya Daringo, we are based in Windhoek and look after the USA Trade Hub's work specifically for Namibia. Please also allow me to briefly do some housekeeping. I will be prompting the speakers to come on camera this afternoon and present to us. If I can please ask all of the other participants to turn off your mics and your cameras while the presenters are busy with their presentations. We would really welcome all of your questions, so please drop them into the chat box if you are scared that you will forget them, but we will give a question and answer opportunity after each presentation. They've been divided into two sections. So after the first section, we will have a question and answer session, and after the second session as well. Before we continue, just a gentle reminder again to please mute your mics if you are not presenting or not speaking. Before we continue, I would like to introduce you to Francis Fraser, who is our portfolio manager for Botswana, Namibia, and Malawi at the USA Trade Hub. Francis has almost 20 years of experience in international development, focusing on market-based solutions for inclusive growth and development. She has managed many projects with various international donors and also fulfilled various leadership roles, including with Toastmasters International on a Southern Africa level. She also holds a master's in agricultural economics and an MBA. Thank you very much, Francis. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Peter, for the warm welcome. I apologize for the dogs barking in the background. Their timing is impeccable. Working from home is one of those uncontrollable, that makes one of those things uncontrollable. But thank you all for joining us today. Certainly these conditions mean that we can connect on a virtual platform like this more easily and share different information and knowledge with one another. So just to kick us off, I wanted to reiterate our mandate as the USA Trade Hub, which is really focused on three integrated objectives that aim to foster economic growth in our region. So the first is to support exporters, in Namibia in this case, to export to South Africa. The South African market is large in comparison to others in the region, but it's also quite a sophisticated market. So part of our hypothesis here, or our rationale, is that if firms are able to export into South Africa, there's a much greater likelihood that they'll be competitive and be able to export into the US as well. So the idea with Objective 1 is to assist Namibian firms to export into South Africa. Then under Objective 2, we seek to support companies in Namibia to raise capital, whether that's in the form of long-term investment capital or trade finance or other short-term debt, as well as technology out of South Africa and into Namibia. And then our last objective is to assist Namibian companies to export to the US and really take advantage of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a trade preference program that allows exports in more than 6,000 lines of products at preferable rates. So we also work with government in Namibia around creating a strategy and launching that and kind of creating the right environment for firms to operate in and to take advantage of AGOA. I will not talk too much about the USA Trade Hub anymore. I think many of you know us quite well, but today I'm really excited about the lineup that we have ahead. It's important information for anyone who wants to export into South Africa. And in fact, there are lessons that can be learned for exporting to many different locations that are evident from what we will share today. As Peter already said, please be ready to come on camera later. We want this to be participative and engaging and to really hear from you about challenges you've faced when exporting, or we want to know about stuff sitting at borders and how things could have been handled differently. So please do feel comfortable to come on camera when we get to the Q&A session. And with that, have a very good and enjoyable, enriching afternoon with us. Over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. Before we get started, please just allow me to introduce our Namibian partners in this event this afternoon. A warm welcome to the Namibian Manufacturing Association, Ronnie and Fina and your members. Welcome and thank you for partnering with us in this event. Also, a warm welcome to our other Namibian partner in the event, Nancy. A warm welcome to you and thank you to Zodidi Gasep for making some opening remarks. Zodidi is the director and founder of African Naturals Production, a Namibian-based manufacturing company specializing in natural cosmetics, especially for the ethnic hair and skin market. She's also a Nancy Council member and has been a Nancy member since its launch. Welcome, Zodidi. The floor is yours.
Good day, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. I am representing Nancy today. And Nancy is a network of cosmetics in Namibia. And we focus on the health and beauty industry. And it combines the interests of raw material, suppliers, ingredient producers, and in-product manufacturers, as well as support and governance service providers. So I've been part of Nancy since its launch in 2017, and I can personally attest to all the advantages of becoming a Nancy member, so to say. And yeah, so basically that is Nancy. And just a little bit of background on what Nancy really does. We offer a variety of sorry, I'm just looking at this thing. Yes, so basically the idea is to promote Namibian cosmetics and the health industry in terms of raw materials. And basically the reason why Nancy was launched was there is such a huge demand for Namibian cosmetics. And amongst other things, Nancy is also in charge of implementing generic marketing campaigns and advocates for the needs of the industry. So we also participate in trade fairs and expos and so forth, not just locally, but internationally as well. It's a little bit tricky given the COVID situation, but there's also opportunities to engage in various importers and exporters through Nancy. And more so, it's a member-run organization that serves as a communication platform between stakeholders of the industry and its members. And basically what members get from Nancy is, like I said, the opportunity to access information which would not be readily available. On the Nancy website, it is readily available in its portal once you become a member. And basically the idea is to give Namibian businesses the opportunity to help grow and expand. And we are really excited to partner with USAID on this journey. And yeah, we're excited to take some notes and share with our members as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words, Zodidi. If we can please go into the agenda, just to give you an overview of what we will be tackling for the rest of this day. I think most of the introductions are finalized. So in terms of what is lying ahead, we will jump straight into the cross-border trade toolkit presentation by Mary Gounder, who I will introduce very shortly. After that, that will be the end of the first part of the presentation. We will go into a Q&A session. So as mentioned, if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you're welcome to put them into the chat box. We will try and give attention to all of those questions when we get to the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask that question by coming online, you're welcome to do that as well. And just come online, unmute your mic and come on camera and give us that question during the Q&A session. We will then go into the next section on Incoterms and certifications, also by Mary. We will have another Q&A session after that. So hopefully we will have enough time to tackle all of your questions, which I think is the important part today. And then we will ask Francis to do the closing remarks for us. If we can move on to the next slide, and without further delay, I don't think you want to listen to me for the whole day. Can I please introduce you to Mary Gounder, who is a consultant for the USA Trade Hub. Mary is a trade and logistics consultant with almost 20 years of work experience. As an independent consultant, she works with development agencies and companies to provide logistics, trade, and process improvement services across value chain solutions. She's also served as an advisory board member for SyncPoint's Enterprise Development Program and is passionate about promoting gender equality in the international trade sector. Mary, a warm welcome to Namibia. It's a pity that it's virtual, but the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And yes, I'd love to visit Namibia, hopefully soon, now that I've got my vaccinations done. And thank you to Francis and to Zodidi for being part of this. It's really exciting to have people who have the experience of exporting and being in business, and who can also share their experiences with us during the session. And I'm hoping a lot of you have questions and would like to share some of the experiences and issues that you've had. I'm going to switch off my video so I can share my screen. Okay, so we started this project in December 2020, where we started discussing with different organizations within our surrounding countries. We looked at 7 or 8 countries surrounding South Africa, and we're part of SADC to look at what are the export processes and what happens when dealing with South African exports. For this presentation, we'll just do a brief outline on the country profile, export readiness, export registrations, export process, the import process in South Africa, commodity-specific requirements, documentation, Incoterms and contracts, payment methods, and next step. As you can see, we've actually tried to put in as much information as possible within the toolkit, but it's not exhaustive. It's literally just explaining different things that you need to look at, and explaining, the different types of documentation, the export processes, and so on that you need to look at when you are starting to export. So we've tried to put in as much information, but also, trying not to overwhelm people, especially if you're new to exports. Some of the products that we've actually looked at for exporting to South Africa, and this includes the other 7 countries exporting to South Africa. So these are ground nuts, macadamia nuts, honey, meat and meat products, bananas, bottled water, cosmetics, PPE, textiles. So we've delved into each and every one of these commodities and looked at what are the requirements in South Africa, you know, a lot of the times people are exporting and they don't expect to have to pay anything, you know, when they're crossing the border because of the SADC exemption for customs duties, only to find that you may have to pay VAT or excise when it comes to cosmetics. So we've looked at all of these issues that people face and tried to actually give you as much information as possible on it. So looking at Namibia, the goods exported from Namibia are comprised of 40% ores and metals, 11% manufactured goods, 22% food items, and 20% of other goods. The top 5 destinations for 2019 were China, South Africa, Botswana, Belgium, and Spain. You obviously have 2 ports, which is Walvis Bay and Lüderitz. And that's another option for exporting goods to South Africa. Fish, meat and meat products, textiles and apparel, salt, olive oil, dates, raisins, table grapes, wood, charcoal, and cosmetic products are the commodities that we've worked on for the regional cross-border trade toolkit. And we'll get into those details a bit later in the presentation. So what I've done is, for this part of the presentation, we're just going through the slides and an overview of the different content within the regional cross-border trade toolkit. And the next part will be actually going through the document itself. So you'll, you know, learn where to find the information if you haven't had access to the document already. And just, you know, if you're looking for specific information, then it's good to actually understand where do you find it and what's covered within the toolkit itself. So we'll start with getting export ready. And, you know, a lot of people start their businesses domestically, of course, and you start selling the product and hoping that, you know, it does well. And once it starts doing well, then people start looking at exporting. So to assess your business itself, I mean, you first really need to look at your commitment to exporting, because it is a huge commitment and it takes a lot of financial resources, technical expertise, and so on. One of the things that you need to look at is the management skills. Do you have management within the business who have experience exporting? And if not, you know, would you look at training them and so on? Your financial resources are quite different to the domestic market, because you will need to actually look at, you know, do you have enough funding to export, because this takes time to actually get your payments and so on. So if you do get an export order, you know, you produce your goods, you export it, and, you know, there's different payment methods. So they might be like up to 2 months before you even get paid for that order. So how do you handle that? And do you have the funds actually to keep your business running in that time? You'll also need technical expertise on exporting. And if you don't, these can always be outsourced. There's a lot of clearing and forwarding companies that you can talk to, logistics companies, warehousing companies, transporters that you can actually get pricing from, and, you know, general expertise on what you need to do, your processes, and so on. Your supply capacity, normally with export orders, it's a lot bigger than your domestic orders. So if you have an order or a factory that you are actually producing your order from, do you have enough capacity and laborers, space to actually produce for an international order? International market intelligence. This is where your TPSPs and organizations like the USA Trade Hub comes in, where they will actually look at finding buyers for you and help you to actually connect with the buyers in South Africa. And for that, I'm sure you can contact Peter for more information. When looking at your product readiness, you really need to look at how successful is it in the local market. And from there, look at the potential to find international buyers, because normally, you know, if you start off with your domestic market, you start producing your product, looking at your packaging, what the requirements are in Namibia itself. And then to take it to the next level, to export to South Africa, we have our own standards and our own requirements. So you'll actually have to meet those. So even when it comes to packaging and how you package your goods, we might have requirements based on the type of commodity you're exporting to us. So these are things that you need to think about. So that is why it's important to have some success in your local market, because then you've already started producing, you've already started packaging and looking at all the different aspects and understanding the costs of these. Your product adaptability, you'll need to look at if you're exporting machinery, is the product usable in South Africa? If you're exporting cosmetics, does it meet the requirements within South Africa? Is there a need for it in South Africa? Because remember, within South Africa, being a developing country, we have good relationships with different countries. We are importing from China, India, from Europe, from South America, from the US. So the competition is very, very high. So you'd actually have to look at how can you, position your product within our market where you'll actually get sales. So yes, I mean, we would want naturally made cosmetics, but there is a niche market for that. And then that's where you come in to actually look for buyers in that sort of sense. Your cost structure compared to your domestic market is very, very different because you have a lot of additional costs. So you've got, if you're air freighting your cargo, if you're moving it over land or shipping it, there's all different types of costs. Then you'll need to look at your clearing and folding costs, because whoever's going to do your clearing and folding for you is going to charge you. And then you also have to look at duties, VAT, excise duties. So you have to understand right at the beginning what are the costs, because that will actually help you with your pricing, because your pricing is going to be very different to what you have it domestically. Obviously, domestically it would be cheaper, and if you're sending it abroad, it's going to be a lot more expensive. But also at the same time, your pricing has to be, competitive when it reaches South Africa. You'd need to look at who your competitors are, whether it's locally, domestically, who's exporting to South Africa, similar products. Also within the South African market, what is available within the market and the prices. So if you have specific products that you're exporting to South Africa, we have a lot of websites and there's a lot of e-commerce available within South Africa. So you could go into any one of our retailers' websites and you'd be able to get prices for similar products. And it's something I would advise you to do, because then you'll have an idea of how to price your product and what sells, because those are the prices that would sell if it's on the retailer's website, really. Your product complexity. This is where you need to look at how much of change do you need to make within your product if it is coming to South Africa. Say, for instance, if you're exporting machinery or something that requires electricity to enable it, are the plug points different? Are there different restrictions? Those sort of things that you need to look at with your product readiness. So looking at your business readiness and product readiness, you really have to look at it as a whole picture and look at where you need to work at, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of organizations that can help you with the skills, some of which you may need to pay for, but really it's just about getting your product to the end market, and it takes a lot of time. So the commitment comes in where you're spending a lot of time researching, a lot of money being spent on going for trade shows, finding buyers, and so on. So you really need to look at, is it worth it in the end for you? Because it may take 12 to 18 months before you even sell a product internationally. Moving on to export registrations and developing relationships with key role players. Registrations, you need to look at your business registration, locally. So in South Africa, we have CIPC. In Namibia, you'll need to register your business with probably the Department of Trade and Industry. If you're an exporter, you'll need to register with customs. You'll need to register with the Chamber of Commerce, so you can actually get your certificate of origin. And if you're exporting agricultural products, you'll need to register with the Department of Agriculture. So there's different registrations that you need to know about and research based on the commodity that you have, and that's your local registrations in Namibia itself. And looking at your role players, the exporter is you. So you need to understand what the processes are. You need to have a relationship with your buyer. And, when you're looking for buyers, it's good to have conversations with them to understand, what are their needs? What are they going to do with your product? Are they selling it on, and in what space are they selling it really? So you understand the end market so you can actually help meet those requirements. You will definitely need to have a relationship with a freight forwarder. My advice is to meet with as many freight forwarders as you can. Normally, freight forwarders will have salespeople, and you can, have a meeting with them, look at what the type of services they offer, whether they offer warehousing, transport. A lot of the logistics companies, offer a full house service. So they'll do your customs clearance, they'll do your transport, they'll offer you space for storing your goods and so on. And also compare their prices. So you have an idea of what to expect when you actually are ready to export. And obviously, this is going to be a long-term relationship. So it may not always be just about price. You need somebody who understands the whole process of exporting to South Africa and what are the issues that you may face. Your bank is very important because, like I said earlier, if you are exporting, it may take about 2 months for you to even get your payment. So look at the type of relationship you have with them. Will you be able to get a loan from them? And if not from them, are there any other options for funding if you don't already have the funding to run your business in this time? Your buyer's notified party is your buyer's freight forwarder who will most likely take delivery of the goods. So you'll need to know who they are and have a relationship with them, and start developing relationship with as many people as possible so you understand who fits where, and how much do you actually have to pay them for these services, what to expect in the future, and so on. Your trade promotion service providers, these are very helpful because they help you find business. It's good for networking because it's really good to learn from other people what went wrong with their shipments, what went wrong with their business. How training is very important because as much as you may go for training in certain things, it's really, really good to learn from other people. And then you've got the USA Trade Hub. It's good to understand you, the type of company that you have, and they've got a website where you can actually link up with buyers, and these are things that you need to actually understand. This is what the USA Trade Hub offers for now, and maybe make the most of it and learn more about it and try and actually get into it where you can actually find buyers for your commodities. The export process, firstly, you would have to start advertising on one of these websites where you have trade websites. The USA Trade Hub does have a website for African trade, and you can actually go on and have a look at that. I think Peter or Francis can actually share the link for that. So you can go on and register and, advertise your product and so on. And there are other trade websites where you can go on and advertise your products, advertise your prices, and then find buyers. So the buyers will contact you, you will give them a quote. And on the trade toolkit, we'll give you an idea of what to include on the quote. So we've given you an example of what a quote should look like. Then you would actually need to contact your clearing and forwarding agent to, select your service provider and also to find out what the prices are for moving your cargo. Because these are prices you may need to include in the invoice, depending on what the Incoterm is. Now, we'll get to Incoterms a little later. For those of you who have exported, you will understand what it is. But for those of you who are new to it, it's not as hard as people make it out to seem. So there's a lot of information on the toolkit on Incoterms, which will be easier to use. Once you've given your quote and the buyer is accepted, you obviously will have to send them a pro forma invoice, and we'll give you the type of information that's required on the pro forma invoice. And once that's accepted, you'll be processing your export order. Now, when you are processing it, you'll have to ensure that your order is according to the stipulated requirements from the buyer. So based on what the buyers asked for, you'll actually have to make sure that you are meeting their requirements. So if a buyer has asked for 100 t-shirts and it has to be blue and v-neck and they all have to be size medium, that is what you need to say. And they would obviously stipulate what type of blue it is, whether it's light blue, dark blue, or a specific shade of blue. So these are things that you really need to make sure is going according to what they want, because you do not want issues later on from the buyer where you've given them something that they have not asked for, because then they won't want to pay, or they might cancel the order, or you'll have to replace the order, and that will just be extra cost for you. So while you're getting the order itself ready, you'll have to prepare your shipping documents and make arrangements with the clearing and forwarding agent for picking up the goods and transporting it, warehousing it where necessary, and so on. The documentation that you'll need to prepare is your commercial invoice, your packing list, transport waybill, if you are handling the transport. If the buyer is handling the transport, then they will provide the transport waybill, the exchange control forms, and your permits. Now, the permit, if it's an import permit that is required, that the buyer will have to provide, and you will have to provide the certificates from your side, whether it's your phytosanitary certificates or your vet certificates or whatever it may be. Receiving payment, the payment will be received based on what you have agreed with the buyer. We cover 4 payment methods in the toolkit. There are different options that you can look at because there are export and import banks and so on. But this is after you've actually made arrangements with the buyer on what type of payment you are expecting. And then your after sales service. So this is part of your export process where once you've delivered to your buyer, you need to contact them and, find out, are they happy with the goods? Do they want to order more, and so on. The import process that we follow in South Africa, firstly, we'd have to register our businesses. We'd have to do our import registration with customs as an importer. We will contact our own clearing and forwarding agents if we need to clear and transport the goods to our premises. Import clearance from our side. Then you've got your documentation that you, the seller, would provide, like your commercial invoice, packing list, the different certificates, transport waybills, and if I'm importing from you and I need to provide a permit, I will arrange that. And normally to get a permit with the Department of Agriculture, it takes about 30 days. So this is time that you need to think about. So you don't want the goods stopped at the border. You need to make sure that your buyer has their permits if it's required. So then you don't have to pay any extra charges and they don't either. Shipments do get stopped for inspection. A lot of the times it's for customs, and usually it's got to do with the documentation. So what customs does is they look at the transport waybill, they will look at the commercial invoice, the packing list, and your bill of entry or bill of exit, and then they will compare it. So if there's any issues, so even if there's errors on the documents, they will stop if there's if things are not looking right. So on your commercial invoice, you've got 150 t-shirts, but on your customs forms, you've got 50 t-shirts. They will stop your cargo. So you need to make sure that everything is correct and submitted properly. And that is why your relationship with the clearing and forwarding agent has to be good. They need to be good at what they do, and they must pick up these errors as well. So your shipments can be stopped by customs. If there's any issues or fraud or whatever it is that they pick it up, they will fine you. They do give you a chance to resubmit your documents if needed. But remember, in this time, you are actually spending more money on storage, you're spending more money on your transport and so on. So that is why it's important to understand what documentation you need and exactly what the process is, so you don't have these delays and extra costs. Okay, and as I said earlier, the import permits are provided by the importer themselves, and the importer has to apply for them. So you, as an exporter from Namibia, you cannot contact our Department of Agriculture and request an import permit. They will not allow it. Okay. Moving on to the commodity-specific requirements. For every commodity that we have been dealing with, we have looked at what are the requirements. Do you need to pay VAT? Do you need to pay customs duties and so on? Now, remember, be exempt within the SADC region for customs duties, you will need a certificate of origin. You will not be exempt. So sometimes you may pay 20% duties if you don't have that certificate of origin. Okay, but generally within the SADC region, you are exempt from customs duties, but you still need to pay VAT. And VAT is calculated at 15% of your FOB value plus duty, which is 0, plus excise if it's applicable, your fuel tax, and 10% of FOB value. Okay, so you coming from Namibia, you don't have to pay that extra 10%. Okay. Then you've got your total landed cost. So for you to export from Namibia to me in Durban, you'll have to pay your ex-works, which is producing the goods, and packaging it and getting it ready for shipment, your origin charges of transporting, insurance, because there is risk with moving any type of good. And at some point, we've had lots of cases, and I've spent a lot of time within the shipping and logistics sector. There's always trucks that meet with accidents. There's rail that just stops for 7 days at a time. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about. When you're exporting, there's always some risk that's involved. So you will need insurance up until you make delivery. You will also have to pay your freight. So if it's shipping freight, if it's trucking, or if it's air freight, you will need to have that paid, and then your duties and taxes. Okay, so if you're looking at something like coffee, and you're sending it to South Africa, we do need an import permit. So if you're sending coffee to me, I will need to apply with the Department of Agriculture for an import permit. And once that is approved, then only can I actually place my order with you. So please remember that an order cannot be placed with you without an import permit from a lot of the agricultural products. And once it gets into South Africa, an inspection is required. So you may have the Department of Agriculture or Plant and Quality who may inspect the goods at the border or once it enters into South Africa. Okay, and these are extra costs that either the buyer or the seller needs to pay, and that's dependent on the Incoterm itself. For coffee, for instance, there are import prohibitions, and this is if the coffee has been colored, polished, steamed, coated, or that any kind of substance has been added to it. Okay, now all the commodities that I mentioned right at the beginning, these are all covered within the toolkit, and we'll go through that at a later stage. So if you look at pistachios, it's same 15% VAT. This is your total landed cost. You'll need an import permit, and an inspection may be required. Okay, the formation of the contract. When you're exporting, and those of you who have experience exporting, you'll know that you don't have a formal contract that's written out in a document. Your contract is literally a bunch of emails between you and the buyer, and that is how you actually form the contract. So a lot of the information of that contract actually goes onto your commercial invoice itself. So even things like the input time, where the delivery is supposed to be made, when it's supposed to be made, a lot of it will end up on your commercial invoice or your pro forma invoice to start off with. So to start off with, you make an offer by advertising your product at a certain price. If you decide that you're no longer happy with that price, you may revoke that offer. But if you've made that offer on Monday and I come back to you on Tuesday and I accept that offer, you can't actually reject my acceptance. So you can't tell me, okay, no, I've changed my mind. You have to make sure that if you've made an offer and you want to change your price, you need to do it before I accept, because from the moment I accept, that's the start of our contract. So you may revoke an offer, but it must be before someone accepts it. Okay. Acceptance of an offer is if you tell me you are selling your cosmetics and you are selling it as a face cream, and each tub of face cream is $10, and I say, okay, I want 100 tubs and I'm happy with the price of $10 per tub. Okay, that's me accepting your offer. But if I come back and I say, look, I really want these creams that you have, the face creams, but I don't want to pay $10. I want to pay $8. That is where I'm rejecting your offer, but making a counter offer. So you can decide whether or not you want to accept the counter offer. Now, remember, if you're new to exporting, you may just want to say, okay, I want to take this order and I don't mind, getting having that order at a lower price. But before you make these decisions, you have to understand how much money are you making from it? Will you make a loss on it if you sell it at that price? And when you're making an offer, you need to make sure that you've got a period of time for acceptance of the offer. So if you're advertising any price for your goods, you need to state whether it's valid for 7 days, it's valid till the 30th of September, it's valid for 14 days from advertising. And yes, make sure that you have these dates, because it's important to make sure that you are considering all your raw materials, costs change all the time, costs of labor changes. I mean, you would have noticed that since COVID started, a lot of prices have increased, and it has in South Africa as well, because a lot of raw materials have increased, and there's a shortage of a lot of goods. So prices will increase, and if you have a period of time stipulated, you can, after the 7 days, increase your price if your raw material prices have changed. The contract obligations of the seller. You have to make sure that you deliver the goods to wherever we've decided that you're going to deliver the goods. So if we've decided based on our Incoterm that you're going to deliver at a warehouse in Namibia, then that is where you need to deliver the goods. So you will give me an address where you deliver the goods, and I will make arrangements to pick it up from there. Or I will tell you, please deliver it to the logistics company I'm using in Namibia. And then you need to make sure that you deliver it. So if I tell you need to deliver it by Friday, it has to be delivered by Friday. And that's something we would have negotiated over time. You must hand over any documents related to the goods. So all the documents that you get ready during the time of producing the goods and getting the order ready, you'll need to hand it over to me. You must also transfer the property in the goods. And by transfer the property in the goods, it means you need to send me the transport document. So if it's a sea waybill, if it's an air waybill, or if it's a transport bill of lading, whoever has that document literally owns the goods, really. So as much as you may have the goods itself, if I've got the documents and it says the consignee is Mary Gander and this is my address and so on, then I literally own the goods. So that is where your documents are very, very important, and that's where your payments come in and so on. So you wouldn't just hand over the documents because it's also transferring the property in the goods or the ownership of the goods. Conformity of the goods must conform to the quantity, quality, and description that you provided and that we've already discussed and agreed upon. The goods must be fit for its purpose. So if you are sending me face creams and you say, okay, this is what you should expect from it. Obviously, we expect certain things from face creams. They are not miracle creams normally, but to a certain extent, it has to be fit for its purpose. The goods must possess the same quality as a sample or model. So you cannot send me a sample and then, the quality is really good. And then when you send me the actual goods, it's not, the quality is lower. That is not how it works. So if you send a sample, whatever goods you send to me, it has to be the same quality as the sample. The goods must be contained or packaged to preserve and protect the goods. So however you're packaging the goods, so if you're using glass bottles or plastic bottles or whatever it is, you need to make sure the goods itself are packaged and these glass bottles are not going to break while it's being transported to me. The obligations of the buyer. So if I'm the buyer, I'm basically required to pay the price. So I need to take the steps. So if it's a letter of credit that we're working with, I need to make sure I go to the bank and arrange the letter of credit. Or if I need to get funding to pay it, I need to make sure that all the arrangements are done on time to make the payment to you. And I need to make sure that I take delivery of the goods. So if you decided that you're delivering on Friday and I've agreed for the delivery to take place on Friday, I need to make sure that I have the premises available for delivery and I'm available for delivery, or whoever works for me is available. Because if I don't take delivery, then that means there's extra costs with transport and storage and so on. And depending on your Incoterm, it could be me who's liable or it could be you. Contract remedies, and the remedies come in play when things don't happen the way it should. So as a buyer, I may claim damages if I don't get delivery of the goods or if I get the wrong goods. So if I ask for blue t-shirts and they're supposed to be V-neck and it's 100 t-shirts, you send me white t-shirts, I can ask you to substitute the goods and send me the blue t-shirts. Obviously, I'd have to return the the white t-shirts to get the blue t-shirts. But I do have rights if you do not send the goods. I can require you to repair the product if the product wasn't working properly, or I can give you more time to make delivery if you haven't delivered on time, or I can say, okay, you haven't delivered, I haven't made payment, I'm going to terminate the contract. Your rights as a seller, you can claim damages. If I haven't made payment on time, you can charge me interest, but make sure these things are actually agreed beforehand. So you understand, okay, you can't just go and claim damages without having agreed to it. The seller may require the buyer to make payment. So if I haven't paid on time, you can give me extra time to make payment. Or you can actually terminate the contract if I haven't made that payment. Okay. Passing of risk, with your domestic transportation, it's quite easy because, you're normally transporting goods within the country and very little, there's not as much risk. But when you are going over border, there's a lot of risk involved because there's different things happening in different countries. Everyone has different issues. We in South Africa, we recently had looting where, a lot of goods were destroyed, a lot of warehouses were destroyed. So the important thing is when you've actually started moving goods, you have to make sure that someone is paying for insurance. So if it's you paying for insurance, it's up until you make delivery. So if I've asked you to deliver at a warehouse in Namibia, you pay for your insurance right up until that time. And from the time you've delivered it to that warehouse in Namibia, I will have to pay for the insurance. Or if we've decided that you are going to deliver the goods here in Durban to a warehouse for me, you will have to make sure that that insurance is paid right up until it gets to the warehouse in Durban. So there will always be risk, but it's very, very important to make sure that you have your cargo insurance in place. So loss of damage or damage to the goods after risk has passed to the buyer does not discharge him from his obligation to pay the price unless the loss of damage is due to an act or omission of the seller. So if you've made delivery and the goods get damaged by accident, okay, I still need to pay you for the goods. But if you didn't package the goods properly and that is found after a survey is done, then I don't have to pay you the price. And that is where we will have a lot of issues. So that's why it's important to package your goods properly, reduce your risk as much as possible. Okay, moving on to Incoterms. So Incoterms are your international commercial terms that provide internationally accepted definitions and rules of interpretation for commercial terms used in contracts for the sale of goods. Now that's a whole mouthful, but basically, when you and I discussing, how much of your commodity I'm purchasing, where you're making delivery, who pays for the insurance, who pays for the transport, who's arranging the transport, all of these can go into very, very long discussions. And, as I've said before, our contract is not a written out contract. It's over email. So we may miss a few things. And that's where Incoterms comes in, because Incoterms will tell you, okay, if your delivery is here and you are using X works, then the X works basically means I'm picking up from your premises and the risk is mine. So we don't have to go into discussion about who does what. By using the Incoterm, we already know who has to do what. So when selecting your Incoterm, the buyers and sellers need to consider the following: your experience with international trade. So if you do not have a lot of experience, you try and get the buyer to pick up from you, really. It makes it a lot easier. But in general, it's literally like halfway, or find an Incoterm that works for both of you. That is why you need to work with a good clearing agent or a good logistics company who knows what they need to do. You need to look at the risk associated with the Incoterm. Are you willing to make the delivery in Durban, or do you want the risk to pass at the border or at a warehouse in Namibia? So you need to really look at, what's the risk involved, what's the cost and financial responsibility. Because remember, if you are arranging for that transport, you need to pay for it. Your experience handling the transport operators, suppliers for international shipments, and so on. So look at overall, how much of experience do you have and how much responsibility and cost do you really want? So Incoterms are done by the International Chamber of Commerce. Every 10 years or so, they do update it based on what's happening internationally. So in 2010, we have 13 Incoterms. Okay. So you've got, actually it was 11 Incoterms. So you've got Incoterms for land, overland Incoterms over any mode of transport, and then you've got those that you only use for sea, because literally you've got a ship there and it's basically whether the cargo is on board the vessel for FOB or alongside the ship. So you can't use these if you're using a truck. So your first Incoterm is your X works, which is where I, the buyer, will pick up the goods at your premises. Whether it's your warehouse or factory or whatever it is, you will produce the goods, you'll make sure it's ready to be picked up, and then I packaged all of that, and you will have the documents ready, and I will make arrangements to pick it up. Free carrier, I will pick it up at a clearing and folding agent's warehouse or another, but it will be by the carrier. So if it's a logistics company, you'll have to deliver it to the logistics company and their address. Okay. Incoterms 2020, very similar. and there's been very, very few changes, which you don't really need to worry about, because you can use either Incoterms 2010 or Incoterms 2020. Again, you've got them separated by whether it's any mode of transport or whether it's for sea and inland waterway. Okay. We will go through Incoterms in the next part of the session. Your payment methods, you've got 4 payment methods. The first one is cash in advance, which is obviously the most secure for you, the seller, because what happens is I will make payment when I am ready to order from you and I'm placing the order. So you'll get your payment, but it's also very risky for me as the buyer, because that means I've paid and I don't actually know whether I'm going to get my goods. And in a lot of cases, the buyer doesn't get their goods. So there is a lot of risk in different types of payment methods. Then you've got letters of credit. And basically what a letter of credit is, I would go to the bank here in South Africa. So if I bank with Standard Bank, I'd go to them and I'd say, I'm purchasing from someone in Namibia and I'm purchasing for $5,000 or $10,000. And I want to open a letter of credit. So my bank, Standard Bank, will contact your bank in Namibia and they will say, my customer wants to open a letter of credit and this is your customer. Does this customer exist? And can you verify that this customer is legitimate? So your bank will come back to Standard Bank and let them know whether or not you exist and, this is what you do and so on. And then once we place the order, I will pay Standard Bank the $10,000 that I owe you, and they will keep it in a holding account, right? Until you make arrangements for the shipments and you submit the documents. Now, letter of credit is not based on the cargo itself. It's only based on the documents. As long as you can prove that you have shipped the goods, and whatever is stated on the document itself is taken as at face value that is what has been shipped. So if you put on your transport label that you've shipped 100 t-shirts, and your commercial invoice states the same thing, and all your documents are in line, then yes, you'll be given your payment, okay? But remember, when you're working with a letter of credit, it is very bureaucratic. You can't make any errors on your documents, especially the bill of lading. Your transport label cannot have any errors whatsoever. So everything that's stated on the letter of credit has to be stated on that. And also you cannot change the dates for delivery and so on. So if you said you're shipping it on Friday, your transport bill of lading has to have Friday's date on it. You cannot have a date afterwards. So before Friday, yes, okay. But after Friday, no, you will not get your payment. So that is why it's very important to understand the different payment methods. So once you have submitted the documents to your bank will check it. If it's correct, they will send it to my bank. If my bank is happy with it, they will make payment to your bank, who will make payment to you. So there's quite a few, and sometimes there's more banks in between. But ultimately, it is the safest way of getting your payment, but it's also a costly and time-consuming way. Then you've got your documentary credit, where we get our banks involved, but they're not as involved as the letter of credit. So they're not going to verify whether you exist or I exist or whatever it is. They will just say, okay, we've got a documentary credit and, we'll make payment on behalf of our buyer. They're not going to put the money in a holding account. So it may not be as secure as a letter of credit for you, the seller. Your open account is where we decide between ourselves that you'll send me an invoice at a certain point and I will make payment. Now, open accounts are usually for in-house companies. So if you're dealing with big companies, so Coca-Cola is sitting in Namibia and we've got a branch here in South Africa, and we are, trading between the two, then yes, these work. But for new customers, it's not, and new importers and exporters, it's not the best way to work. But in some cases, people do negotiate these, but obviously it's a risk that you take. So there's a lot of information that I've covered, but basically the idea is to understand as much as possible before you start. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to have covered everything and know everything in detail. You need to just understand the process that you need to follow for your specific commodity. You need to build relationships with the key role players and stakeholders. Attend relevant meetings, trade shows, whatever you need to get your business out there, and focus on your core business. So if your core business is cosmetics, you work on that and you work on the quality of that. Okay. And then you delegate any work that, that can be done by others, like the clearing and forwarding, the transportation, and so on. You don't need to buy a truck to move cargo. You just use somebody else's truck and pay them for it, literally. And you also need to invest time and money in building your export business. Okay, so that's it for the first part of this presentation. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was quite insightful, and I think a solid base to go into the next phase of a bit more details. So if I can maybe ask, is there any questions from any of the participants at this stage? We haven't received anything in the chat box. So please, okay, we've got one hand up here from Stradom. Stradom, you're welcome to ask your question. Thanks.
Hi, hello. Yes, thank you, Peter. I just got a question on the SADC and the certificate of origin principle. You mentioned that if you don't need to pay duties, import duties, if you've got a certificate of origin within SADC countries. Does that apply for all products, or is it? I mean, if you can get a certificate of origin, and all SADC countries, or is that anyway? There's no duties in SACU countries. Between SACU countries, only the import VAT. But like if we want to export from Namibia to Angola, there's a hefty duty on the border, import duty of about 50% on our products. Do you say that with a certificate of origin, if that product is manufactured in Namibia, we won't pay that the duties?
Yes, if it's within the SADC region, then you wouldn't need to pay the duties, and but you will need to have that certificate of origin where which you'll normally get from your Chamber of Commerce or your Department of Trade and Industry. So you'll need to check who can actually issue with that certificate of origin. But you will need to pay that. And depending on the type of cargo, you might need to pay excise as well. So even if you don't need to pay your normal duties, you might need to pay excise, but it depends on the type of cargo and where it's going.
Okay, thank you. Now I just need to know which is the best institution to find that out, because we started it and with our local clearing agents in Namibia, and they went all the way, and we present samples and everything to Customs Namibia and to even Ministry of Trade and Industry in Namibia, but nothing came of it. They said, no, there's no agreement like that between Angola and Namibia. So we're a little bit confused here, which way to go with it.
What cargo is it, if you don't mind me asking?
Packaging material. Packaging material. Yes, yes.
In some cases, there's been overlap with the African Continental Free Trade Area and the SADC recently. But you don't normally have a lot of, it's just for normal cargo really that you wouldn't pay the duties. So I don't see why you would need to pay, and you should be able to get a certificate of origin if it is being manufactured within Namibia and the raw materials are coming from Namibia.
Yes, yeah, there are certain rules about that. It should change. The last couple of digits on the HS code should change because there's a lot of conversion being taking place, but we qualify for that. But yes, okay, we will take it further.
I think maybe just submit a question to Peter, and then he can pass it on to me, and I'll see if I can find some info on it.
Okay.
Because yes, depending on the type of HS code, you might pay duties on certain things.
Okay, no, thank you.
Great, thanks for the questions, Tatum. Thank you, Mary. We've got a hand up from Arvel. Arvel, do you want to ask your question, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So maybe I just want to make a comment on Stradium's question. We've had the same experience to Angola. So, and the actual fact is Angola is not part of SADC yet. So the negotiations is on their way to Angola becoming part of SADC. But at present, they aren't part of SADC. So, and then even if they become part of SADC, there will be a 5 to 10 year lapse of the duty going down. So for the next 5 to 10 years, the duty will be applicable in any sense. And then on the certificate of origin, there's actually two options. You can either do it through the NCCI. They also issue a certificate of origin. That's not the SADC one, but it's also, in a lot of cases, it's accepted. And then on the SADC certificate of origin, it was always under the Ministry of Finance, but it's now actually under NAMRA, Namibian Revenue Agency. So they will provide you with a form that you can fill in with a lot of details, and then they will come audit you, and then you will actually then get a SADC producer number. So just for reference sakes, we had the same experience. So thank you. Actually, just a comment, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Arvel, for confirming that. If I can maybe just go into one or two of the questions that we've received beforehand, Mary, if you don't mind. There was a question from Katja asking, how must I prove to the Ministry of Finance that the consignment was indeed export and I didn't charge VAT on the consignment?
Okay, usually to prove it was an export, you'd actually have to provide your clearing documents that you've used. So that might help. Yeah, if you can just provide them with the actual documents, then that should be for them.
Thanks, Mary. I don't know if Katja wants to add anything to that question that she submitted, or if she has a follow-up question. I don't see any other hands or questions in the chat box, so maybe I can just proceed to another question that we received beforehand.
I see a hand from Sophia.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Sophia, please go ahead. You can come onto camera and ask your question.
Hi, Peter. Thank you very much. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but it's two very basic questions. Exporter registration, where do you go to get that registration in Namibia? Sorry, maybe it's a stupid question, but where do I go to register as an exporter?
Usually it's done with customs when you want to register as an exporter. I'm not sure if Peter can give us more info on that, but usually it is customs itself.
And okay, certificate of origin, it's NCCI, or if you want the SADC one, it's NAMRA, the previous participant mentioned.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No, it's just because I'm registered as an importer, but not as an exporter. So, and I thought I can just use the importer registration also for exporting, but it seems that it's different.
Yeah, because you'd have more benefits with it as an exporter. So they would have a different code, or you may use the same code, but you'd have to be registered first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia, for the question. There's a question that came in from Vanani in the chat. Maybe we can tackle that before we take another question. If goods get damaged in the process of transportation, who is responsible in the case where there's a middleman, where a middleman is used?
Regardless of who is used for your transportation, it's between the buyer and the seller and where you've actually decided on where the delivery happens based on your Incoterm. So if it happens while it's under your responsibility and you've had to transport it to a warehouse in Namibia for me, and you've used a middleman, regardless of who you use, you'd still have to have insurance to cover if any goods are damaged. And it'll be up to your insurance company who will go through and claim from the middleman or the transporter who you've used. But firstly, you'd have to have your own insurance. So it's either the buyer or the seller. So if I've decided to pick up from your premises, I'm responsible for any damage, and I would have to have insurance. So you start up with that. Because you cannot have that assumption that a middleman is going to have insurance on your behalf. So as the buyer or a seller, you'd have to have your own insurance and make sure it is covered and you are ready for the risk if it happens. So getting to the point of claiming from a middleman, that'll be after you've claimed from your insurance, and they may actually go and claim from that middleman.
Thank you very much, Mary. There are no other questions that I see for now. We've got some other questions that we can come back to later that we received beforehand, but I think for now we can actually move into the second part of your presentation, if you don't mind. Once again, just for the other participants, if you have questions that come up, please put them in the chat box. We will tackle them as soon as we go into the next question and answer session. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, great. So I put up my video and I'm going to share the actual toolkit with you. So some of you may have received this, and if you haven't, it is on the SatiHub website. And I'm sure someone can actually put in the link on the chat there for you. So the document isn't very long. It has a lot of explanations that I've gone through already. Okay, so we first go through the different countries that we've covered for the exporting part, which is Angola down to Zambia, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, and Namibia. Then we've covered the export process itself, which we've gone through now. The import process with a little more information on the customs processes in South Africa. The documentation that you will need, and Incoterms and contracts. Then you've got your different finance and payments. And at the end of the cross-border toolkit, we've got our fact sheets on honey, processed meat and meat products, plant and plant products, your list of cleared plant products, fact sheets on dried beans, and your FAQs. And right at the end, we've got the annexures, which is the Incoterms and your commodity special requirements. So here we just go through the different countries, which you can read through for your own interest. And we start off with the export processes, which we've gone through, your business readiness, your product readiness, exporter registrations, export quote, what's needed on the export quote, and things to think about. Sorry, let me just zoom in for that. So your product cost, your insurance cost, transport cost, and any other cost that may be relevant. So if you are delivering, if you're using the Incoterm DDP where you're delivering right to my warehouse and you're paying for everything, you'll have to look at your export clearance and your import clearance cost. So whatever cost may be relevant for the shipment, and that is why it's so important to know which Incoterm you're using right at the beginning and where your delivery is happening. Then you've got your pro forma invoice, which has your exporter details, which is your details, your consignee, which is my details as the buyer, reference numbers, shipment dates, your bill of lading numbers, or your master airwaybill numbers, your letter of credit details, the Incoterm that you're using, your order numbers, purchase order numbers. So there's a lot of information that actually goes into it. Your mode of transport, your carrier. So that could be the logistics company that you're using or the shipping line. Your order numbers, licenses if required, your country of origin, quantity, unit selling price, value in USD, any certifications, special instructions, and then your signature at the bottom. Okay, and then we move into processing the export order. Obviously, it's making sure that you're meeting the buyer's requirements, and there's a lot more explanation on that and getting your documentation ready for your export. Then we look at the imports, the different processes that we follow in South Africa, and our customs processes. So in some cases, yes, customs will stop your cargo, and especially if they think it's one of our restricted goods. Okay, so if it's any drugs or weapons of any sort and so on. So if they assume it might be any of these, they will stop it automatically, or if there are any issues with the documents itself. So if the documents don't tally up with what I've put in my bill of entry and what you've put on your customs documents, then the goods will be stopped. Okay, so your customs duty values are determined by your HS code that you use. So every single product that you export would have an HS code, which will use the same HS code in South Africa. And based on that HS code, customers will decide on what the duties are. Okay, so they'll have a look at it and they will look at whether or not there are restrictions on that cargo, and they will also check. So if it's agricultural products coming into South Africa and you need an import permit, and I need to have an import permit, if I don't have it, that cargo will be stopped. And when they stop the cargo, they'll notify me or my clearing and forwarding agent. Then they will have a depot that it goes into. It will be inspected. I will need to resubmit certain documents. And only once they're happy, then they will release the cargo. So any delays from my side or from your side with the document, you will have extra fees that you need to pay, as well as storage. Anything that they are not happy with releasing, it goes into state's warehouse until you can release it. If you don't ever release it, it stays there for a couple of years, and then eventually it's auctioned off. Okay, your documentation that you need, your pro forma invoice with the information that's required there, and your commercial invoice, which has more or less the same information as your pro forma invoice. So here's an example of the commercial invoice. There's not much that even changes between the your pro forma and your commercial invoice. You've got your packing list that you need to do, and which basically gives you the quantity, the items, number of items, the type of packaging, whether it's boxes or crates or drums, the number of those, the weight, the cubic measurement, and so on. Your transportation documents, which will be dependent on your mode of transport. So you'd normally have an airway bill if it's air freighted, a bill of lading or a transport bill of lading, depending on whether it's going overland or if it's going by sea, you'll have a normal bill of lading by the shipping line. Your certificate of origin will be required. And your phytosanitary certificates where you are dealing with plants and plant products. Okay, moving on to Incoterms. So we've discussed Incoterms a little earlier. And we'll go into it in a little more detail when we come right to the annexure. Okay, and we look at your normal obligations within the contract as a seller, as a buyer. Your different payment methods are explained in a little more detail. So this is just to show you where to find the information and what type of information is on the toolkit itself. So here we've got our first fact sheet, which is on honey. And what you'll find is with honey, we've got choice grade and industrial grade honey. You need specific markings on your packaging, and that's where I refer to the packaging itself. You need to know what's required for the South African market. Okay, so with honey, it is very, very specific. This is how you need to package it, and this is the type of marking that's required on the label itself. So it'll literally tell you the grade of the contents in letters at least 2 millimeters high and so on. You've got your meat products. So you will have to contact your state vet for a certificate. And here in South Africa, we'll have to get an import permit from our state vet, and that would obviously take about up to 30 days. So as an importer, I will contact our state vet here and get a permit from them. And once I've got that permit, then I can import from you. Okay, so again, with agricultural products, I would have to contact them here in South Africa, look at whether it's allowed to bring certain products in the country. And if it is, then only will they give me an import permit. I would have to apply for it with the shipment details, the amount of cargo I'm bringing in, and who the supplier is. So I would have to give them your details, which they will verify with their Namibian colleagues, and then only will they actually offer me the permit. Okay, we have a list of cleared products depending on which country it's coming from. So these you do not need an import permit, but these lists change all the time. So the best thing to do is get your importer to actually check the requirements from the Department of Agriculture. We've got a fact sheet on dried beans as well. So depending on how it's being packaged and the different grade, these are the specifications that you need to look at, and this is what you need to actually get assessed in Namibia before exporting dried beans. So depending on the grade that it is. Okay. And then we move on to the FAQs, things like how can you avoid delays when shipping to South Africa. The main thing is having the permits available and before you ship, and making sure you're meeting the standards and requirements of South Africa. And you need to find out all of that before you even process your order, because otherwise you will have stops at the borders. It does take time and you will have issues. Questions like how do you price your product? So you'll need to take into consideration your production, labor, and transport costs, and your competitors. What are they selling the same product for? What is the amount that they sell it for? And how much can you actually play around with your price? Okay, can you customs clear your shipment yourself? You could, but I don't advise it, because their forms are complicated. If you're not used to it, if you miss out a bit of information, your cargo will be stopped. So best thing to do is find a reliable logistics or clearing and folding company to do it, and leave them to do what they know best. Unless you have a problem with it, then find another company. But if you do not have that experience with actually clearing cargo, don't try clearing your own cargo. You're just going to waste your time, and that time wasted could have been focused on your product itself. Who is responsible for import permits? It's the buyer's responsibility. So if I'm importing from you, I need to make sure that I have the permit in place. And that's why it's important to make sure that your risk passes before the border. So anything that happens afterwards is the buyer's problem. Obviously, you can help them with whatever issues and documentation and so on, but they need to take responsibility for the permits. So please check that they have permits for whatever they want to import from you. Your Incoterms. So here we have the Incoterms explained very, very simply. So if you're using XWorks from Incoterms 2010, this is the acronym for XWorks, which is EXW. These acronyms are known throughout the world. It's international. So whether you are transporting cargo to South Africa or China or the US, everyone around the world understands Incoterms. If they are within trade or international trade, or they're in logistics and so on, they would understand what you mean by XWorks. Okay, they would know what you mean by FCA or free carrier. Once you state, okay, I'm using Incoterms and I'm using free carrier, they'll know what you mean. So that is how they've actually made it easy to use Incoterms, because wherever you are in the world, you will have to understand Incoterms. Even if you are sitting in Pakistan or India or Mauritius or Angola, you would have to understand what these Incoterms mean when you're dealing with international trade. So you use the Incoterm XWorks. You can use it for any mode of transport. When you're stating it on your document, you will have XWorks and your address of your factory or warehouse. And then you will have it as Incoterms 2010. Your place of delivery will be your premises as a seller. It will be the named place, agreed time, and not loaded, meaning you will have to have the cargo ready. It must be packaged and checked and weighed and counted, but that's all your responsibility, to just have it ready in a specific part of your warehouse where I can just come send my transporter to have it picked up. Okay. So up until it's at the buyer's disposal, meaning I can easily pick it up, it's for your cost and your risk. Once I pick it up, it's my risk. So as soon as I pick it up, I'm paying for the transport, I'm paying for the insurance, and I have to make all the arrangements. You need to provide me with the licenses for export, your certificate of origin, your phytosanitary certificates where applicable, commercial invoice, packing list. And because I'm picking it up from your premises, I will actually arrange the transport bill of lading. The risk passes at place of delivery at the agreed time, which is your warehouse or your factory. So what we've done here is we've tried to make it as simple and as easy as possible for you to figure out what Incoterm to use. So it really explains to you, okay, if you are using Incoterms 2010, you are using DAP, which is delivered at place. You can use it for any mode of transport. And when you're stating it on your document, it would be DAP at a specific warehouse or terminal or whatever it is, and Incoterms 2010. So the seller delivers the goods when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer on the arriving means of transport, ready for unloading at the named place of destination. So if I've chosen a terminal or a warehouse in Namibia, you just need to transport it there, and I will have to offload it and make arrangements for it to be offloaded and placed within the warehouse, as that is where it's going. Okay, so this makes it really easy for you to figure out, how much risk do you want, how much of responsibility do you want, and then you choose your Incoterm based on that. If you're looking at DDP, this is where, you literally just deliver it all the way to my warehouse or my premises as the buyer. So DDP is delivered duty paid. So it means all the customs duties the clearing and forwarding, the export clearance for Namibia, the import clearance for South Africa, you'd be responsible for. So you'd get a logistics company to do all of that for you and then include that in the price that you're giving me. So the seller delivers the goods when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer, cleared for import on the arriving means of transport, ready for unloading at the named place of destination. So if I asked you to deliver it to Durban, it means you would have cleared it to come into South Africa. You would have transported it all the way to Durban and to my warehouse, and I will make arrangements to take it off the truck or whatever transport it is. Okay, so you are, as a seller, you're responsible for all costs up until delivery. Okay, you must pay the cost of those checking operations, packaging that are necessary for the purpose of delivering, and you'll be responsible for the export clearance and import clearance. Okay, so you as a seller, you procure the contract of carriage. So whoever you're using to, whether it's a logistics company, a shipping company, or air freight, you will get that contract arranged, and you will have the maximum obligation. So I only need to worry about once it comes to my premises, and then it's at my disposal, and I can get insurance if I need to at that point. Okay, but I'm not really responsible for any of the transport or to do anything. And that's where you have the most responsibility as a seller. If you're new to exporting, I would not advise you to use delivered duty paid. You can use DAP for delivering it within your country, or to arrange for export clearance. So DAP, you're not involved with the import clearance. So depending on how much you understand, that's how you'll actually choose your Incoterms and how much money you actually have to outlay, because your transportation you have to pay for the customs duties and so on. Okay. So we've done the same with the 2020 Incoterms. You've got explanations. So whichever one you look at, you'll be able to see where your risk passes and so on. And these are things that you really need to look at and do it before you start, negotiating with the buyer. So you understand, when the buyer says they wanted DDP, you can say, no, you're not comfortable with it. You'd prefer DAP at a certain place, and they would have to, agree or disagree. Okay, so there's a lot of Incoterms to choose from, but ultimately it's easy to see where your risk ends, what you're responsible for, and you as the seller can take it from there and decide, okay, what are you comfortable with? Annex B is your commodity special requirements. So here we've got your requirements for all the different products that we have looked at to get it to South Africa. So if you're looking at textiles and apparel, or meat and meat products, you pay the same 15% FOB value. You're responsible for a certain amount of these costs, and that's dependent on your Incoterm. For meat products, you will need an import permit, or your buyer will need an import permit, and there will be an inspection. Okay. For textiles and apparel, a tariff rate quota may apply. So there is a maximum of cargo that we can get when it comes to textiles and import from different countries. So there is a quota. Once you go above that quota, then you'll actually have to pay customs duties. And that quota is dependent on the HS code and the actual textile itself. And so if it's, women's dresses made of cotton or whatever it is, the quota may be different to when you are dealing with PPE or any other apparel. Okay, so salt and import permit may be required. Inspection is required, and obviously if it's fine salt and any white products really, usually of concern to customs and all the other authorities. So we have to be careful. And raisins, an inspection is normally required. You may not necessarily need a permit. Okay, so we've gone through all the products and looked at exactly what's required for customs and for your license requirements. So this makes it a bit easier, but ultimately it's between you and the buyer that you're dealing with to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements for your specific product. Okay, so that's it with the toolkit, and I hope you do find it helpful. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you very much, Mary. Really appreciate it. Some very good information that came through. I see we have one question from Benani again, asking, from your expertise, do exporters fetch the same prices as locals for the same item sold? How does an exporter position themselves in the market to fetch a better price given COP and TC?
What do you mean by COP and TC, Benani?
Benani, are you on the line? Can you respond to Mary?
Oh, cost of production and transport cost. Look, it depends on the actual product that you are offering. You know, when we're importing from China, we find that we get a lot of cheaper prices on their products. Because what we find is, you know, our labor costs in South Africa are higher. So your product, even though you may have, you know, your cost of production and your transport cost, you may still be able to offer it to us cheaper than we'd be able to get it here in South Africa. Because as I've said, our labor costs are very high, it's very regulated. And so that brings up our production cost a lot. You know, previously we had a huge textile industry in South Africa. So 20, 30 years ago, it was great. But because we had international companies competing with the South African market and they could offer us the same goods at a much lower price because they didn't have those labor costs, we barely have a textile market now. It's actually just come back slowly because of COVID. So you may be able to offer it at a lower price, and that is really looking at your production price and obviously trying to lower your transport costs. And obviously, if you are producing in bigger amounts, your costs are usually lower because of economies of scale, and you may actually be able to offer it. But the best thing to do is compare it with our South African prices if you have access to our retail websites, which are quite easy to access. So if you are doing clothes or cosmetics, you can go onto woolworths.co.za or to game.co.za or any one of our retailers and look at, you know, what are the comparative price and look at whether you can actually price it better. But also, I mean, the quality may be different and may be better. So that's also something to consider. So it may not always be about having a better price. It depends on the cargo itself or the commodity itself.
Thank you very much, Mary. Are there any other questions from the participants? I think while we wait for that, maybe I can just go to one or two of the other questions that we've received. So the question is, one company exported to South Africa, but the consignment got stuck at the border due to a VAT payment. We thought it was going to be done by the importer, but it was not done. So there were long delays in getting the goods to cross the border. Is there a way to avoid this?
That will be dependent on your Incoterms. So based on where your delivery is done, If you've decided to deliver to the importer at their premises and it's literally DDP, you will have to make sure that you are paying for that. That's why you would have to go back and choose your Incoterm and make sure that you don't have to do the import clearance side and pay for that. And make arrangements in advance with your buyer, you know, who's paying for what. And just, if you're not sure, just check with them. Because if you are paying for it in advance, it should be included in your final cost to them.
Thank you very much, Mary. We've got a hand from Francis. Yes, Francis, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that response in terms of a discussion that we had around this. And one of the ways of also handling that is just to make sure you've got a good clearing agent that you've built a relationship with. Because if you are liable for that cost according to your Incoterms, sometimes the clearing agent can actually make the payments and then invoice you for that. And so you don't have to sit with waiting for a reference number while your truck's on the border and trying to send proof of payment, which can make things a lot smoother. And what's also very important is whether the buyer has the required import code that's linked to that payment, because if it is an item that doesn't actually need to be that's not VATable, they can claim it back, but they would need to make sure that they've got the right import code and everything when the transaction happens. So there's quite a lot of detail in terms of that is specialized clearing agents can help. Sorry.
Thanks, Francis.
Thank you very much, Francis. Are there any other questions at this stage? I don't see any hands or questions in the chat box. While we wait for that, please do feel free to give us another question. I can maybe just go to this question for now, Mary, which is, how do you find reliable freight forwarding and clearing agents?
Sorry?
How do you find reliable freight forwarding or clearing agents?
Firstly, you'd obviously have to search up which freight forwarding agents and logistics companies are based in Namibia, and then go onto the websites and look at what their services that's offered by them, and meet them, and look at their premises, because a lot of logistics companies are huge. They're in almost every country, and it makes it easier to deal with them. But there are also local companies that you could use who understand the market. So the bigger companies are usually a little more expensive, but it's dependent on what your needs are really, because a bigger company may not want to deal with a small shipment. They may not give you the best price, but for a smaller company, they'll be happy to do the business. And you know, with the bigger companies, it depends on how much of business you have and negotiating power and so on. So the best thing to do is to do as much research online as possible, meet with them, because they would all have to they even want to deal with your business. So just meet as many of them as you can and talk to as many of them, and so you can get a better understanding of what they can do for you.
Thank you very much, Mary. We've got a question from Craig. We were informed by the state vet of South Africa this morning that no permit is required for the importation of salt mineral lick products for animals. Do you have any understanding on this? Can you give any guidance on this?
Can you all send that question via Peter to me, and I will contact the department directly and check with them. And because there are certain products that you may not need the import permits, but I can always check here and just get back to you, because I've been dealing with them with a few other products as well. Okay,
perfect. We will do that, and as soon as we get some feedback, Craig, we will pass that on to you. There's another question here from Nampa. What purpose does the export permit serve when exporting goods? Should we apply for an export permit for each order, or do we wait until the buyer requests it from us?
So if you're talking about your certifications, what you could do is, if you know how much of cargo or commodity of the quantity of the commodity that you're going to be sending over the next year, then you apply based on that. So that way you don't have to apply every time you have a shipment. But on the import side, we would actually have to get the permit ourselves on the import for the import permit. So you wouldn't be able to get the permit. You'd actually just have to get your certification from the Department of Agriculture or whichever, or forestry, or whoever you're dealing with. We on our side, we'll have to get our import permit. You will have to wait until the buyer actually has their permit, because if any cargo is sent without that permit, and if that permit is really needed, you will have delays once it gets to South Africa. So depending on your Incoterm, you might be liable for those costs.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Are there any other questions? I think while we wait for that, I've just been reminded of a question that Sophia had on the exporter registration that I missed. Apologies for that, Sophia. So to my best understanding, the import and export VAT registration requirements sit with the Ministry of Finance and specifically Customs. In terms of export registration, that is with the Ministry of Trade. But I can also get Strydom or Arvel to just come online and just confirm if there have been any other updates lately with some of the new. I know mention was made of the Namibia Revenue Agency, so I'm not sure if there have been new changes that came through from that. If there's any confirmation from Strydom or Arvel on that.
Thank you.
Peter, sorry, I don't have any news on that.
Thank you, Strydom. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I think we can actually move into the last part of our proceedings today, and that is to hand over to my colleague Francis, who will just take us through the closing stages of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter and Mary, for a really interesting session. I hope that everyone who participated took value out of that. Thank you also for all the firms that have experience in terms of exporting, for sharing information. I think that's really something that we should value more. There's a lot of wealth of experience within the companies that we work with that we should really access and share as much as possible. So just to wrap up, if you're wanting to know whether the presentation is available, it certainly is. It will be shared with everyone who registered, and it will also be available on our website. So that's satsihub.com under the resources page. And you'll find both the recording of the session as well as the actual PowerPoint presentation there. You can also find the toolkit or the manual that Mary was using in her presentation on our website. You'll also find about 30 other webinars and topics that we've discussed in other sessions, some focusing on US exports and different requirements for different sectors. There's some sessions on organic certification, for example. So please go and look on our website. There's really a wealth of information available on previous sessions that we have run. Then in terms of a few upcoming events, we are running similar sessions in Mozambique and Zambia next week. So if you want to listen in again, I'm sure we can arrange that. But the idea here is to really have some locally relevant information available to the companies that we partner with across the region. Then important for cosmetics and food ingredient firms. So it's specifically for ingredients, not final goods. On the 15th of September, we have a linkage event in the US. So it's focused on US exports of food and cosmetics ingredients. And that's being pulled together by our partner in the US, Triple F Associates. Their requirements for ongoing support and linkages are quite stiff. So you need to have an FDA registration, food compliant labels, FDA compliant labels, sorry. And you also need to have some sort of a food safety certification or similar certification in the cosmetic side. So quite for more maybe advanced or experienced exporters for that one. And then on the 21st of September, we have a cosmetics sector market intelligence linkage webinar. That's where we are partnering with the South African Consulate in New York to have a discussion with cosmetics buyers in the US around different trends in the market and also what buyers are looking for, and an opportunity to meet a few buyers that the SA Consulate have brought on board. That's open to Namibian firms as well, of course. Then just in terms of if you need more information on some of the cross-cutting topics that we've discussed, please feel free to reach out to us. In Namibia, Peter is obviously your contact person, and his email was shared in the chat, but it's also on the next slide. If you also have maybe subsidiaries or other businesses in other countries, or if you have colleagues that operate within the region that might find interest in the work we're doing, you could also contact the relevant country representative. Nondre, maybe if you could just show that previous slide a bit longer in case anyone, thank you. In case anyone's got colleagues in other countries, we can always also assist you through Peter to link up with relevant people in South Africa, Angola, or elsewhere. With that, a big thank you to everyone in the USA Trade Hub team who made today's webinar a success. Please give us feedback if there's something we could have improved on or something you loved. Please just drop us an email, a WhatsApp. You can even drop it in the chat if you've got any suggestions for us. We're always open to that. And thank you for taking the time to learn and share. And we look forward to engaging with you in future sessions. Peter, thank you for hosting us today, and Mary for guiding us on all of this useful information. Zudidi, thank you for representing Nancy as our partner, as one of our partners on this. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.